Hello, bio people. I am Mr. Shrum, and I am back with another tutorial. And this one is focusing on the relationships in ecosystems. So after this lesson, our objective is to analyze evidence of the effects of environmental changes on the relationships within an ecosystem. So let's get into the content. They start off with a warm-up. In an ecosystem, organisms are competing. They're always competing for resources. Intraspecific competition occurs when there's competition for resources between members of the same species. So given that information, what do you think interspecific refers to? And give an example with your explanation. You can pause the video, or I'll just give you a sample answer. Interspecific competition refers to competition between members of different species. So competition between, let's say, humans are intraspecific competitions, while humans versus other animals would be interspecific competition. In this pyramid, this trophic pyramid shows the different types of organisms in an ecosystem. Why do you think a pyramid shape is used to show this categorization? Well, the bottom of the pyramid is made up of plants and other organisms that perform photosynthesis. And that photosynthesis transforms energy from the sun into energy that can be used by all living things. An ecosystem needs to have more of these organisms than any of the other organisms because these guys provide energy for the rest of them. All right. It starts here at the plants and organisms that perform photosynthesis. They allow everyone else to thrive. There's the intro video, but we'll skip that for now. You can watch it on your own. Resources and competition. Let's get into that. So from the simplest microbe to the largest of the grizzly bears, all organisms rely on their environment for different resources. And resources, if you want to break that down, this includes water, food, shelter, space to live and roam, or any other substance or object needed for growth, development, and the ability to reproduce successfully. Every ecosystem has a limited amount of resources, so only so many organisms can be supported at one time. So this is why organisms are competing, either directly or indirectly, with each other for survival. Like we said, a resource is any object or substance that an organism needs to use or consume. They use resources such as food, water, shelter, and sunlight for growth and development. The amount, type, and use of these resources differs from species to species. But a lot of species require the same ones, and that is why competition takes place. In a limited resource ecosystem, for example, in a forest, plants need sunlight, rain, space, and other resources. So plants are competing with each other for those resources. When an individual of the same species competes for essential resources, That's intraspecific. An example here, rams, male rams fighting for mates is an example of intraspecific competition. So males in certain species are sometimes fighting other males to mate with the females. Interspecific competition occurs when organisms of different species compete for resources, such as zebras and gazelles competing for grass in the same region. Competition has also played a role in the evolution of species. Stronger competitors will get more resources and are better fit to survive. And they will likely have more offspring compared to those that are not competing as well. For example, monarchs and other butterflies have evolved to rely on specific species of plants to reduce competition for the same plants. Monarchs are also called milkweed butterflies because their larvae depend on milkweed plants. So over time, these guys have specifically but have adapted to using milkweed and not other resources. So a video you can watch on your own, but after that, there are these questions. An invasive species is an organism that's not native to a particular ecosystem, but ends up actually invading the region. The populations of invasive species can rise pretty sharply. And this is in part because the species may not have natural predators to control their populations. So if a species enters a region that is foreign to them, they may not be able to exist without disrupting the ecosystem. And if they're in an area where their normal predator is not, that means their population can grow a lot faster than usual. And you can see that in this graph. This is an invasive tree species. This tree has an earlier reproduction and growing season than many of the native trees. So if it's able to reproduce and grow before the other trees in the region, that's more competitive and they're able to use the resources before the native trees, the trees that were originally there, they can use those resources that they were going to use. And here's sample answers. As the trees grow, they can limit sunlight availability for other species of trees and plants. Some plant-eating animals may rely specifically on native tree species for food, and if the invading tree species reduces the supply of their food, the animals have to compete even harder for the reduced amount of resources. Moving on to trophic pyramids and food webs. So trophic pyramids and food webs. For an ecosystem to thrive, there has to be a balance of different types of organisms. You can't have a bunch of predators without prey, and too much prey can lead to unbalanced ecosystems where there's a lack of food resources for the rest of the organisms. Food webs and trophic pyramids can be used to show the flow of energy availability through the ecosystem. And they can also identify competitive relationships between an ecosystem's organisms. And let's learn more about energy pyramids and food webs. So to get more specific, this is a trophic pyramid, and trophic levels is basically energy levels. So from each level, energy is being consumed or lost, right? An energy pyramid is a graphical representation of how energy is transferred in an ecosystem. It shows how energy from the sun goes to each organism's at the different levels. And it's represented in the form of a pyramid to show that there's a decrease in the amount of useful energy as it moves up the level. So the sun's energy enters these guys, the primary producers, such as seaweed, zooplankton, phytoplankton. They have the most usable energy, and they're getting it directly from the source. And as they use it, and that goes up to this level, there's actually heat energy loss. And then decomposers are actually getting some of that energy too from each level. And each level is known as a trophic level. Organisms at each of these levels consume energy from the one beneath it. These organisms are categorized as producers, consumers, and then decomposers. So these guys down here are the producers, everyone else consumers, and then decomposers. Producers. These are organisms that are creating their own usable energy. These include plants, single-celled organisms that can perform photosynthesis. Autotrophs are organisms that have the ability to synthesize their own food. Plants are autotrophs because they can convert sunlight, which is radiant energy, into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis. Plants then use this chemical energy to carry out their metabolic functions. Producers make chemical energy for the ecosystem. And consumers are able to eat those producers or other consumers. And they're referred to as heterotrophs because they need to consume energy in order to survive. So, for example, humans, other animals, such as cows, dogs, cats, dolphins, they all consume other organisms. Some eat plants, while others actually eat smaller animals. Scientists classify consumers based on the type of food they consume. And that's broken down into three categories: herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. They are also classified as primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary consumers, depending on their position in the pyramid. And then we can look at those in detail too. Primary consumers, they are herbivores. They eat only plants. So they are eating the primary producers, right? They're the first level of consumers because they consume the producers themselves. Herbivores include deer, prairie dogs, rabbits, anything that eats plants directly. Secondary consumers are smaller carnivores that eat herbivores. They can be strict carnivores or they can be small omnivores. Carnivores consume only meat, but omnivores eat plants and animals. Smaller carnivores include spiders, frogs, and snakes, while omnivores include sea turtles and mice. Tertiary consumers, both carnivores and omnivores can make up this third level, or tertiary consumers. They feed on secondary consumers in an ecosystem, and depending on the system, tertiary consumers can be carnivores or omnivores. Tertiary consumers include carnivores such as jackals, foxes, and hawks, or omnivores such as dolphins. Quaternary consumers are large carnivores in this fourth level. And this level is often the highest level in the food chain. These consumers are the largest carnivores or omnivores, and they can feed on tertiary consumers, secondary, or primary. Some food webs may also classify larger omnivores as higher level consumers. Positions of organisms can vary depending on their actual diet. Some ecosystems may have only like 3 levels of consumers, while others may have 4 to 5 levels of consumers, depending on how complex the area is. Organisms at the top of the food chain are called apex consumers. Apex consumers may have few or no natural enemies. They don't really have anyone that can eat them, usually. And then we have decomposers. So we have the plant producers, the carnivore, herbivore, omnivore consumers that eat other organisms, or the decomposers. And these guys eat dead plants and animals. Microorganisms, including bacteria and fungi, feed on dead organisms and bring about their decomposition. Some insects and worms also aid in this decomposition. They go by detritivores, because decomposers and detritivores recycle nutrients and energy. They're essential parts of the ecosystem. During this decomposition, organic matter breaks down and the nutrients return to the soil for new plants to grow. So this is a key part of the cycle. Conservation of matter. Now, this is an important point as well. The total amount of matter in an ecosystem is constant. Energy and matter can neither be created nor destroyed. They are conserved in every ecosystem. And decomposers provide the perfect example of how it's conserved. Decomposers release energy and nutrients stored in plants and animals into the atmosphere. Organisms are composed of organic and inorganic matter. And different elements such as nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus may change their form in the bodies of organisms during different biological processes. And finally, when an organism dies, this matter is then recycled and returned to the atmosphere. So the amount of matter in the atmosphere remains the same. Here's the example of the carbon cycle. Energy flow in an ecosystem. This pyramid shows the amount of energy that is passed on from consumer to consumer, or from level to level. The sun provides energy, and this fact is indicated in the image as 100% at the bottom of the pyramid. Producers convert energy from sunlight into chemical energy that's needed by the organisms in the ecosystem. Different levels of consumers are located above the producers. Consumers use chemical energy for various metabolic processes. Some part of the energy actually gets stored in the bodies of these consumers, and the rest is released as heat energy lost as heat. Energy transforms from a usable form, chemical energy, to an unusable form, heat. So chemical energy, useful. Heat, organisms can't really do anything with that besides keeping the bodies warm, I guess. In this way, energy is never lost. It can always be accounted for. As you go up the pyramid, decrease in numbers, biomass, and energy. In the trophic levels, the amount of usable energy decreases. So the size of the level corresponds to the amount of usable energy. The lowest, the largest is 100% usable energy, and then that gets smaller and smaller as it gets lost. And it's estimated that only 10% of the usable energy is transferred to the top level carnivores, or to the next level. Yeah, so 100% and then 10% to the next level, and then 10% of that, and then 10% of that, and then 10% of that. So 10 to 1 to 0.1 to 0.01. When energy transfers to the top level carnivores, only a fraction of that original energy is actually left for them in the food chain. And this loss of energy at each level is due to the metabolic needs of the organisms or the release of heat. The amount of biomass or the mass of living matter in an ecosystem decreases at every trophic level. For the top pyramid to survive, there must be enough producers to support all levels from the bottom to the top. This significant loss of energy at each level explains why there must be plenty of producers in an ecosystem, but fewer large carnivores. So producers are the most numerous in the ecosystem, while quaternary consumers, the top level carnivores, there's not very many of them. Review the two diagrams. The energy pyramid shows the loss of energy along each trophic level. The energy flow diagram shows that if 10,000 kilocalories of energy is obtained by plants, the top level consumers will have only 10 kilocalories of energy because at each level, only 10% of the energy is transferred. For example, if the total amount of energy in that first trophic level, the producers, is 22,500 kilocalories, then the second level, first level consumers will have 10% of that, which is 2,250 kilocalories. According to the third level, or the second level consumers, that's 10% of that, which is only 225 calories. or kilocalories. And the next level will have 22.5 kilocalories, while the topmost consumer, fourth level consumer, will have 2.25 kilocalories of energy. So it went from 22,500 to 2,250 to 225 to 22.5 to 2.25. So 22,000 to 2. Energy flow and trophic levels. Heat loss, heat loss, heat loss. A lot of it is lost. Food webs. Now, this is another way to show energy flow through an ecosystem. Oh, excuse me, I just had to let my dog inside. But this food web, they are often complicated models that show many interconnected pathways through which energy flows in an ecosystem. They don't classify or group animals into different levels like the pyramids do, but they do show the ecosystem's predator-prey relationships. So in a pyramid, it wouldn't be this spread out. But this food web lets us see the intricacies and how everything is related to one another. So we can look at this image and see that hares are food for both wild cats and jackals, while owls, snakes, and wild cats eat mice. So food webs can explain more complicated interactions, such as who's competing with who, what's competing with what. And these arrows indicate which way the energy flows. So plants flow to the hare. Hare energy that it ate flows to the wildcat. The wildcat's energy flows to the lion. And you see how the lion, there's no arrows away from the lion until he actually becomes decomposed. And in this activity, you get to look at a food web and then answer some questions. Looking at this water bird food web, this only focuses on the things in the water and the birds. So at the bottom level, we have zooplankton, phytoplankton, submerged aquatic vegetation, or SAV, vegetation. And these move on to the next level, benthic invertebrate, zooplankton, and then small fish or clams, and then larger fish eat them or larger birds, and then larger birds eat the fish or even small ducks. But here is how you organize that into a trophic pyramid. You have the plankton and vegetation as producers, and then the next level, consumers, next level, and then at the very top, you have osprey or the bald eagle. Now you're given some math problems. And you're just calculating 10% as you move to each level. So an easy way for this, for you to do this. So that's the first level. Then you're just taking off a 0. Right, you're here. But then you only need 10% of that. And then the next level, you take off another 0. So we went from 357 to 35 million to 3 million to and so on. So you see how each level is reduced. Okay. Okay. What weaknesses exist in your trophic pyramid diagram? And that talks about what's the difference between the food web versus the pyramid. What do you not see here that you actually get to see here? Well, the food web shows you where each level goes to the next, right? Here it just lumps them all together in groups, but here you get to see how this supports this and this and this, and then that supports that, that, and that, and this supports this and this. It's more complex. In relationships and ecosystems. All ecosystems are interdependent, meaning that every living thing in an ecosystem depends on other organisms. Being interconnected allows these organisms to obtain the resources they need to survive. And any change in the population of one species could potentially affect other organisms that are living there. For example, if the number of predators in an area rises, there may be a decrease in the number of prey animals. Because if more predators are there, they have to eat more, and that may lead to more prey dying. This change may result in less food being available to the predators. Mosquitoes, pond skaters. Let's see. Predator, prey. Here we see two populations. One is of the hare, that's the solid red line, and then the lynx is the dotted line of orange or yellowish. And as you see the relationship, the more hare, the more lynx tend to appear. In an ecosystem, the relationship between a predator and its prey is of utmost importance. The number of predators in an ecosystem balances the population of prey because the prey is the source of food for the predator. An increase in the number of predators for a certain prey animal will cause the population to decrease, the prey population to decrease. And similarly, if the number of prey rises, an increase in predators occurs because of the increased food supply. And that's what we see here. The hare is the food supply for the lynx. And the more hares there are, the more lynx there can be. The lynx is a predatory cat and depends on the snowshoe hare for food. as the hare population rises and falls, that lynx population also follows whatever the hare is doing. You see that? As the hare rises, so do the lynx. But as the hare goes down, so do the lynx, because that's their food. No food means no lynx. And this correlation shows their interdependence. That means they depend on each other in some way. Symbiosis. All living things, all living beings coexist with each other. But some species have a specific dependence on another species, and that relationship is called symbiosis. And symbiosis indicates a relationship between at least two organisms of different species in which at least one organism benefits from the relationship. And there are three main types of symbiotic associations: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Mutualism is probably the best. It's a symbiotic relationship between two species in which both of them actually benefit from this relationship. Obligate mutualism. In obligate mutualism, the species are completely interdependent on each other for their survival. The involved species can't survive without each other. If one of the species dies, the other species will die too. For example, the yucca, a flowering plant found in regions of the United States and Mexico, share a mutualistic relationship with the yucca moth. Female yucca moths pollinate the yucca plant, while the yucca plant acts as a favorable host for the moth's larvae. Yucca moths are the only pollinators for the plant, and the flower provides a perfect place for the larva to grow. In this way, they share an obligate association. Facultative mutualism. In this type of mutualism, both of the species can survive on their own. Both species can benefit from the relationship, but they can also survive without the other person or other thing. For example, certain plants have seeds that birds don't digest. The birds and the plants share a beneficial relationship. The birds obtain food from plants, and because the seeds don't actually get digested, the birds help with the distribution of plant seeds. But the relationship isn't obligate. The birds eat other plants, the plants have other means of dispersing their seeds. So it's like an open relationship, almost. They're not exclusive, and they can live on their own perfectly fine. In the case of obligate relationships, a decline in the population of one species will severely affect the population of the other species because the species are just too dependent on each other. It's like, it's not the most stable relationship, I suppose. But facultative, they get it. Snails and algae share an obligate mutualistic relationship as shown in the graph. On the other hand, facultative relationships don't demand such strong dependence. Now, excuse me, commensalism. One of the involved species benefits from the relationship while the other species is neither benefited nor harmed. This species that benefits from the host is the commensal. And an example of this is the association between filter feeding barnacles and humpback whales. So on the whales, there are actually these barnacles, and they are small arthropods, and their larvae undergo stages of development. And then they settle onto hard surfaces, and that includes a whale's back to have better access to food. The whale offers these commensals protection and nutrients as it moves around in the water. But the whale doesn't really benefit from the barnacles, but it doesn't hinder their health either. So it's not a win-win, it's like a win-nothing, and the barnacles are benefiting. But the whale isn't harmed at all. Another organism that demonstrates this is the goby fish, or the goby fish. Gobies change their color according to the color of the animal they're close to. The host isn't harmed by the gobies, and the gobies obtain protection from their predators. Like other relationships, there are different degrees of commensalism. In the case of the barnacles and the whale, the barnacles don't need whales for survival. They can attach themselves to rocks or piers as well. And the degree of dependence of most species can't be fully confirmed. It becomes more apparent when an environment changes drastically and there's a change in the ecosystem. The worst, unfortunately, is parasitism. A parasite is any species that lives at the expense of the host organism. It's kind of like the saddest relationship. The parasite obtains nutrients and energy from the host organism, and in the process, the host is harmed and sometimes dies. Obligate parasitism. This is when parasites require the host for their own survival and are entirely dependent on them. Without the host, the parasite can't complete its life cycle. Many times the parasite depends on the host for its reproduction. For example, many bacteria are obligate parasites. They actually need a host to grow and replicate. The bacterium that causes Rocky Mountain fever is a natural parasite in insects and other arthropods. It's transmitted to humans through infected fleas and ticks. Humans are known to be important hosts for this particular bacterium. Facultative parasitism. This is when parasites can survive on their own without hosts, but having a host increases the survival rate of the parasite. So many fungi are facultative parasites. They are mostly saprophytic, meaning they grow on dead and decaying material. They can survive on dead trees, but they may become parasitic in nature, preferring to grow on living trees. The relationship between a parasite and a host is inversely proportional. And that means an increase in the parasite population indicates a decrease in the host population. Because the parasite harms the host and therefore affects the growth of the host, when there's more parasites, there are less hosts, and where there are more hosts, that means there is a decrease in parasites, right? If the parasite increases, the host decreases. If the parasite decreases, the host increases. It doesn't always hold true though. The relationship may also depend on the nature of the parasite and its specificity, like how specific it is with the certain host it needs. If the parasite is facultative in nature, its increase may not necessarily affect the host population at all. In this activity, there is an article, Human Birds Communicate to Collaborate. And then you're asked about what type of relationship the humans and the honey guides have. Why do you think it can be difficult for scientists to determine whether an apparent relationship between species is an example of symbiosis? And then you're going to use evidence from the article to support your answer. Choose one of the studies mentioned in the article. What was the researcher's hypothesis? How did they test their hypothesis? List 3 questions about the symbiosis that could be answered with further research. So come up with your own ideas. And then we have the summary video. And that is it for relationships in ecosystems. So I hope that was enlightening. Hopefully you know how to describe the interactions between organisms within an ecosystem, and then how producers are consumed by consumers, and then consumers either die or decompose they are decomposed by decomposers. And they break down dying or decaying material. And it's all part of the cycle. Energy and matter is constant. And there are different relationships between organisms. Symbiosis, it can benefit both parties, it can benefit just one, or it can benefit one and then hurt the other. And that about summarizes everything. So until next time, I hope you all have a good day, rest of your week, and good luck. Bye-bye. See you.